So welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Naina Dasgupta and I am the Digital Marketing Manager at EMT Distribution. We are a value-added distributor for ThreatConnect in Australia, New Zealand, and Asia Pacific. So I'll go over some housekeeping items today, then over the agenda, and I'll go ahead and introduce today's speaker. First of all, I wanted to let everyone know that everyone's phone lines are muted, so the background noise will be at a minimum. If you have questions, please ask them by typing them into the chat feature on your webinar console. All questions will be answered at the end of the webinar. And most importantly, we are recording this today, so we will be sending the recording to you over email as soon as we have it available. Today's topic is that we're going to review how small security teams can use threat intelligence to increase detection while minimizing the number of false positives being sent to defensive devices. And like I mentioned, we'll be ending with a Q&A. And your speaker today is Toni Gidwani. She is the Director of Research at ThreatConnect. Toni leads ThreatConnect's research team, which is an elite group of globally acknowledged cybersecurity experts dedicated to tracking down existing and emerging cyber threats. Her team routinely publishes research pertaining to cybercrime and nation-state attacks and actors, including a body of work surrounding Russian efforts to hack the 2016 US presidential election. Toni has presented at security conferences worldwide and has appeared in many top journalistic outlets, including The Economist, CNN, The Financial Times, and The New Yorker. Prior to joining ThreatConnect, Toni led analytic teams with cybersecurity course at Georgetown University. Feel free to follow her on Twitter at @T_Gidwani, where she tweets about bad puns and cybersecurity. That's it from me, and it's over to you, Toni.
Great, thank you, Nina. And good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking some time to learn a little bit more about how to get started with threat intelligence. As Nina mentioned, I'm the Director of Research at ThreatConnect, and today we're going to talk a little bit about how small teams can make an impact with a initial investment in threat intelligence to help improve their security. Maybe if my slides want to cooperate. There we go. So a little bit about us. We've been around since 2011. We've got over 130 employees around the world, but I'd say the right side of the chart there is a little bit bigger. So ThreatConnect is a platform, boasts over 19,000 users. We are used by 39% of the Fortune 500. And that allows us to really be tied in with how different teams can leverage an extensible platform in order to improve security. So a little bit about our team. So our research team is a small and crafty group of researchers. We create threat intelligence that we publish through the ThreatConnect platform, but we're also sort of the power users of the platform within the company. So we eat our own cooking at ThreatConnect and have experienced a number of these use cases that I'm going to talk about today, as well as how this platform enables a small team to really punch well above our weight class. And Nina mentioned some of the work that we've done and published, the work that we've done pertaining to Russia and other nation state actors is absolutely on par with what we see much larger teams producing. And a big part of how we're able to have that impact is the efficiencies that we gain and what we're able to do by leveraging ThreatConnect throughout all of our operations. So to talk a little bit about what we're going to discuss this morning, we'll talk a little bit about the problem, where threat intelligence can help you with when you're just getting started, and most importantly, how to show value from that investment in threat intelligence. And this last piece is something that we hear a lot from different customers and teams that are just getting started, where there's this realization that threat intelligence is important and a great way to make a security team more efficient and effective. But being able to show the impact of that work is something that a lot of teams struggle with. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well today. So I wanted to start by talking a little bit about different threat intelligence maturity levels. And this is something that we use with a lot of organizations. And one of the things that we want to stress is that ThreatConnect is something that is useful for teams on any part of this spectrum. So while we have all sorts of really incredible opportunities and ability to automate really complex operations that we see coming out of some more mature programs, today we're not necessarily going to talk as much about that or use cases like threat hunting. Today we want to start, sort of a little bit more on the left side of this spectrum for teams that are unclear where to start or just warming up to threat intelligence and are getting ready to start consuming threat intelligence data and using it in their environments. So some of the problems and the pain points that we hear from teams that are just getting started. First and foremost is that you're getting a deluge of data, usually indicators that are coming in through all sorts of different inputs, whether that's spreadsheets or email lists, industry-based groups. There's all sorts of data flowing in, and it's very difficult to manage. It's a manual process to get that into a device like a SIEM or an EDR tool where it can be consumed for matching purposes. And because of that, it's also very difficult to manage that data in terms of the data health and quality. It's no team wants to make this investment and then find out that they're just blowing up those devices with false positives and end up creating, it feels like, more work for themselves than the gains that they're going to experience from being able to bring in this information. And the last one is something that's a little bit distinct from that, those first points around, all this different data and how to get it efficiently consumed by my devices. This is more the, the fire drill, no pun intended, when something big grabs headlines and company leadership wants to know how this affects them. And this is something that we see, all security teams face, even relatively small ones, that when you get those headline grabbing attacks, things like WannaCry or, NotPetya, or recently a few weeks ago with the ransomware attack against Norsk Hydro, teams have to be able to turn around and tell their leadership, what this was, are they affected, what's their exposure, and to be able to do that quickly. And so that's something else that even teams that are just getting started with threat intelligence find themselves having to answer. And these are all areas where ThreatConnect can really ease this burden for a team. And so likewise, for a lot of teams that are just getting started and are a little skeptical about threat intelligence, the types of objections that we hear, and these are certainly not unfair, is that it's a fire hose of data. It can be extremely noisy. We'll hear concerns that it requires a fully dedicated team to be able to use this information, and that's really only for teams that are on that very mature end of the spectrum that we talked about a little earlier. But fear not, my friends. We're going to talk through how all of this can be resolved by using a platform, and 3 guesses as to which one we're going to talk about today. So, with ThreatConnect, we've mentioned that this is a platform that allows you to integrate all of your different tools, and provide that single pane of glass visibility to drive action. So, we want to do this by enabling a team to plug in all their different devices and systems here to enable that visibility. So whether that is bringing in that data, and so we mentioned sort of that aggregation piece, whether no matter how you're getting that data today, getting that into the platform, automating the way that that is consumed by your defensive devices, and being able to action that in a timely manner, and then leveraging a lot of automation around that to make a small team substantially more effective. All right, so those are some pretty slides, but let's dig into this in a little bit more detail. What does this actually mean? So I mentioned, sort of the first part of this use case here is aggregating different data sources. The platform comes out of the box with a premium intelligence source that is created by my team, as well as open source feeds, that come into over 35 different sources that are published at least daily. All of this is mapped to our common data model. All of those indicators are scored and tagged. And that allows our customers to be able to curate whatever subset of that data they want to be able to plug into their SIEM or defensive devices. And it takes all that work out of their hands in terms of having to deal with a massive spreadsheets or things that are coming in through email lists, as well as what subset of that data they want to be able to action. Similarly, we also are pulling in over 100 blogs daily into our technical blogs and report source. So there, we're not only formatting the indicators on the ThreatConnect data model so they can be, machine readable, we're also preserving the formatting there so that it's human readable. So for me as an analyst, one of the first things I do every day when I come to work is I log into ThreatConnect and I check out the technical blogs and report source. It's basically one of the best ways for me to figure out what's new in the space today that I need to worry about, or what new campaigns are being published about. And then if you're subscribing to premium feeds, again, whether that's an industry feed or through one of our partners, like a CrowdStrike, a FireEye, or a Flashpoint, or a Recorded Future, you can integrate those too. And all of that comes in with the platform, leveraging those subscriptions so that you've got a single management interface to be able to handle all of this data. So we talked a little bit here, the purpose for doing this is to be able to make this machine readable so that it's consumable by your integrations. And the most common one that we see with customers, even teams that are just starting out, is using a SIEM. All that data is going to be standardized on a common data model, and you can see those indicator types here on the right. These are what you're going to see mostly coming out of these feeds, particularly these top 5 ones: IP address, email address, file hash, host, and URL. Those data points can be filtered by source, so whoever's reporting that information, the time frame for where that information is going to be reported, so that you can make sure that you're providing fresh and relevant data into your devices, threat rating and confidence, as well as false positives. So we have a number of levers here that speak to that noise problem that enable our customers to curate what that data is so that they get that right balance of action without too much noise. All of this data also comes with deprecation rules, because we know that not all of this information needs to be plugged in over time, and that the shelf life of certain classes of indicators degrades relatively quickly. You never want an IP address from 3 years ago to be lighting up in your SIEM. That's almost always going to be a false positive and something that you don't want to happen. So we've got best practices to sort of manage that data flow to make sure that only the fresh information is going to go into your SIEM, but you can preserve that older information for historical purposes to aid in investigation or trend analysis, so you can get the best of both worlds. And then, of course, all of this is API accessible, because how else are you going to manage that many indicators? Okay, so one of the things that is really important to us as analysts is context. Just getting a naked list of indicators is really frustrating and not really intelligence. That's just threat data. So one of the things that we focus on a lot at ThreatConnect is providing enough context to enable smart decisions to be made. So here we have an example of an indicator that needs to be cleaned up, and you can see that from this very high observation count, and you can see that reflected in the confidence rating here that's coming out of Cal, our collective analytics layer. So again, even sometimes where the best laid plans don't come through, we've got analytics at scale that help us correct these problems to clean up data. Now, on other data, you're going to find other things of use here, including things like tags that are really useful both to categorize the data and to enable pivoting around the platform, as well as what else it's associated to. So, we want to be able to see what addresses are, hosting what types of URLs and hosts, what else they've been associated with, and to provide all of that at a glance on a single pane of glass to make the analyst's life easier. So understanding trends. Here now we're working up a little bit higher level for the type of context that's going to be most useful for human analysts, as opposed to machine readable threat intelligence that's going to be consumed by another security appliance. As we work through, so this is an example here of one of our hunting incidents produced by my team and one of my researchers. What we'll do is we'll work through malware, we'll detonate that, we'll look for the behavior information and continue to conduct analysis on what this might be related to, and share that with our customers. And so, here you're going to get human readable description. Again, these tags, which are very useful to be able to pivot off of and identify information that's going to be relevant for you, whether it's potentially here by industry or by country that's affected with, the type of Trojan that's being used, or the tactics of phishing and dynamic DNS. All of those are different ways that we as analysts want to be able to find information in the platform to see what else could be related to this. And it's a very powerful way to, again, take that huge massive data that's going to exist in a platform like ThreatConnect and be able to focus in on what's going to be most relevant to you. And then, of course, you need the ability to generate reports, because it's great to be able to get that information in, consume that information, see what else it's connected to. But sometimes you got to get it out of ThreatConnect to be able to give to your boss. Now, I have to admit, I've got a little bit of an advantage here because my boss happens to be the VP of product at ThreatConnect. So I can get him to go into the platform to look at something. But I know for most of our customers, that's not the case. They need something that's going to look nice, that they can take out of the platform and disseminate easily. So we generate reports, and it's a simple one-button click for download PDF on any of these group types, and it'll pull sort of that whole dossier that goes with it. And our customers are able to change this logo to theirs if they want. And there you go. You'll have that one click later to be able to send out. So we've talked a little bit about different data streams. I mentioned there are over 35 open source feeds that are being ingested on a daily basis in addition to all of those blogs. But I want to spend a little bit more time talking about premium intelligence, because the open source streams certainly have some value, but one of the things that we find, particularly from new teams, that they get the most value out of is the work that our researchers do, because we're covering a huge swath of potential threats and different types of malware and infrastructure that are going to be relevant to customers. And you get the advantage of that even if you don't have a team that's able to do that type of hunting on your own yet. So as I mentioned, that this source, the ThreatConnect intelligence source, is analyst curated intelligence. So it's lower volume than a lot of the open source feeds, but much higher fidelity because of that. So everything that goes into this source is worked individually by one of my researchers. And that's coming out of hunting systems that are both malware focused and in terms of infrastructure. One of the things that we're constantly doing is looking at these infrastructure campaigns that are, credential harvesting or phishing, and looking at the patterns that we see over time in terms of, consistencies in how that infrastructure is registered and stood up, where it is hosted, and we're able basically to run those traps and come up with infrastructure that may be pre-operational. So we're able to give advance notice to our customers here of things that may not have been used in an attack yet that can then be taken down. And that's something that our customers tell us is very helpful for them and a very helpful complement to the work that security teams are doing. So we're covering a range here of criminal and nation state actors. One of the nice things about the customer set that we have is that it's broad enough that almost any company is going to be able to find information that's relevant to them within this source. Because it's analyst curated intelligence, right, we have a very low false positive ratio because so much manual work goes into creating this source. So what are some examples of how you would use this? So we span here from the tactical to the strategic use case. So starting with the tactical, again, for customers who are mostly focused on, I want to see those indicators and I want to pump them into a defensive device, we can do that. So all of this information, we're going to have indicators of compromise that are associated. We'll use those tags for context. And this is a screenshot here of some of the most commonly used tags within the source, as well as we generate snort signatures off of our incidents that are consumable right away. Although I have to admit, most teams would take those snort signatures as an input and tweak them a little bit to be more reflective for their specific environment. But the snort signatures are a great way to sort of get started in actioning this information, outside of just using it in a SIEM. So I mentioned we span, we cover intelligence across a whole range of issues, and that can be nation state, it can be criminal, it could be malware, it could be infrastructure. So within all that, right, I've talked about tags a couple of times here, and there's all sorts of different ways to isolate intelligence that's going to be of relevance to you. And so some of the categories that we use for tags include, what industry was this targeting or affecting? What malware family was involved here? Where we have exploit information, we will use CVE as tags, which is very, very powerful. We've got customers who then will take this and use this to inform their vulnerability management efforts by basically running a periodic scan to see what new threat reporting is aligning against CVEs. And then that can be used as an input to make decisions on patching, or other mitigating strategies. Exploit's another very common one that we'll use here. Basically these tags are very powerful ways for an analyst to get to, a body of information that's going to help them answer the question at hand. So I also mentioned though that, we go up to the strategic level as well here. And this speaks more to understanding the nature of the threat and the trends that are happening over time with these different groups and threat actors. So basically our data model goes from that tactical level of individual indicators up to these different types of groups that are more strategic and allow for more additional context and analysis to be incorporated into the platform. So here I've got a screenshot of a number of different threat actor groups that you could dig into and have, a nice synthesized assessment of who these groups are, sort of their greatest hits of what attacks they are associated with, the types of tooling and malware that they use, and the attack patterns that they leverage. And you'll notice here that we're vendor name agnostic. I really can't fix the fact that, that FireEye uses APT10 and that CrowdStrike uses Stone Panda, and other companies who are malware focused call them menu pass. We at ThreatConnect try not to make this problem worse, so we don't add our own naming lexicon because, to be honest, that's not what the world needs. And then what we'll do is we'll leverage those tags that I mentioned earlier with all of the aliases, so that no matter which name you're familiar with, or which premium vendor you might subscribe to, you can get to this body of information, because that's really what is most important for a researcher. You don't want to miss out on valuable reports because it's tagged with a different alias. Okay, so to sort of wrap up, here what we've talked about thus far, even for teams that are just getting started, there are some really powerful ways to use threat intelligence. And the use cases that we see the most from teams that are just starting to make an investment in threat intelligence, first is that data out. So using the API to arm your SIEM with this machine readable threat intelligence. And we've talked a lot about the different ways to filter and curate that data so that that is something that is value added to your organization and not creating, more pain than it's worth. The second one is an investigation, and we've showed a number of the sort of higher context parts of the platform that are designed for humans coming back in to do analysis, and supporting those investigative use cases where something's hit and it's suspicious and you're trying to figure out if it's malicious, and if so, what it's related to. Those types of questions are things that we see right off the bat, sort of on day one from our customers. And then that third one is maintaining situational awareness, right? So keeping on top of those latest attack patterns, keeping on top of the breaking news, and being able to quickly characterize, those developments when queried, by your leadership. Okay, so I wanted to conclude here by talking a little bit about how to show value when you're just getting started. And we know that building a mature threat intelligence operation takes years. Most of us don't have 5 years or so to see return on investment. So one of the things that you can find on our website is a white paper called Building a Threat Intelligence Program. And it's based off of surveys that were conducted with over 350 cybersecurity decision makers. And by decision makers here, I mean, director, senior director, and C-level decision makers. And so we conducted the survey last year. And there's all sorts of really great insight in that survey about, what the use cases are for teams that are just starting, how that spans from, newer programs to more mature programs. But what I want to draw out here was, a really strong finding that we saw was that, almost all the programs that responded said they saved a significant sum of money in the last year from their threat intelligence programs. And there's a pretty big spread that you can see there from the least mature, only saving potentially a couple $1,000s a year, up to the really well-defined programs, saving well north of, $1 million. And so there are a couple of things here that are really interesting to us. I think there's a few things going on here with those numbers. Teams that are getting more value and are making a bigger investment in threat intelligence both have the ability to capture that money saved. So you've got better visibility on what that impact is. And as a result of that, you get that positive feedback loop, right, of seeing where else those investments can save the business money. But even, programs that are just starting are reporting finding a savings. So this is a pretty powerful stat. And for teams that are just getting started, this is something that can help, sort of provide that North Star in the direction that we want to be moving. So one of the things we see first and foremost is that for programs that are just starting, the biggest gains come from improving visibility. And so you almost get this sort of Schrodinger effect, right? Where, you've got problems and you don't have problems and you don't know it because you can't see it. And so, this little tongue-in-cheek meme that we have here, right? That the bulls are both intact and broken at the same time. There's a little bit of that tension for programs that are just starting. Because by improving that visibility, it actually looks like things are getting worse sometimes before they're getting better. And improving that visibility is key to understanding the threat that the organization is facing, as well as then investing in how to improve and enhance your detection. So those are the areas where we see, where programs are just starting. These are usually the first areas where they can point to really concrete gains coming from threat intelligence. So what are some suggested metrics if you're just getting started with this? A lot of times we hear that threat intelligence metrics tend to be very report-based. How many reports did you write and were they read? And that's sort of that third bullet there, that qualitative feedback loop. And it certainly has its place, but a lot of teams struggle because that's pretty much their only metric. And that is something that becomes really difficult to hang a program on. So in talking with customer teams that are relatively new to threat intelligence, some of the things that we've seen and that ThreatConnect can help you answer are some of these other questions. So IOCs that are actually observed within your environment. So again, sure, you may be ingesting 100 feeds and millions of indicators, but how many of those and which of those were actually seen in your environment that you were able to block? That's an excellent metric and something that a platform like ThreatConnect can help you answer very easily. So similarly, the second one here is incidents that are discovered from threat intelligence. We have a customer who, when he started at this very large corporation, he didn't have a team, he didn't have a platform, and a big chunk of what he had started doing was taking data, throwing it against logs and seeing what they found. And in this case, this organization had kind of a wonky, both SIEM configuration and the way they had their SOC work outsourced. But he had almost within that first year, 3/4 of the incidents that team worked were discovered from threat intelligence. And it was a really powerful validation of not only the value of this information, but the other types of changes within the security team that needed to be made, because it really showcased where the limitations were of the existing setup. So we've talked about that qualitative feedback loop. The reports you write and the feedback you get and the decisions those enable are awesome. But you want that to be, one of the metrics you have, not just the only metric you have. And the last one that we recommend is countermeasures enacted. So again, where these teams can show that based off of the information that threat intelligence provides, the organization was able to make decisions to better secure itself. These are not metrics that require a super mature team or a very sophisticated program. Even if you're just getting started, these are things you can show in that first year that puts you on excellent grounding to continue to grow and mature. So that's all well and good, but who's got time to sit around and run all these reports to pull all these metrics? And the answer, of course, is nobody. So one of the things that we're doing at ThreatConnect is making that easier. So, for example, we've talked a lot about feeding intelligence into a SIEM or EDR device. Our SIEM integrations are bidirectional, which means that your SIEM will report back into ThreatConnect when that indicator was seen in your environment. Voila, you're able to create a dashboard that will capture that information and provide those statistics, basically at a single click. Our data model then also allows you to do other customization that would help you add some of those other pieces. So, for example, to add a tag to an incident within your org that said, yes, this resulted in a new incident, or adding course of action behavior to show what decisions were made based off of this information and did it work. All of those things you can add here and layer on top of that input intelligence in order to be able to show that effectiveness to your leadership. All right, that's basically all I've got for today. I think Nina said we've got some questions on the line, so I will hand it back to her and we can go from there.
Thanks so much, Tony. So I think we have one that came in a little bit ago. It says, if there's a risk of alert fatigue, does that mean more work for my team?
That's a great question. So the risk of alert fatigue goes back to some of the points we've been talking about throughout the presentation, right? And a big part of that comes from data curation. Alert fatigue is something that very easily could create more work for your team, but your platform should help you reduce that risk, not increase it. So some of the ways that we do that within ThreatConnect, right, are again through those different the different levers that we can pull on data quality and freshness to help reduce alert fatigue, as well as honestly customizing the frequency and types of alerts. We know as analysts that that some things are more important than others. If I'm following something as part of an investigation and I see that host move to a new IP address, I might want to know that immediately. Or there could just be things that I'm following more generally where, once a day in my summary email is perfectly sufficient. I don't want to be spammed with that, as soon as it happens. So that's something that the platform should help you with, not make that problem worse.
Okay, and then there's one more. It says, I have a team with very limited resources. What would be the main aspects of intelligence research I should focus on?
Yep, that's another really good question. We find for teams with limited resources, threat intelligence tends to focus mostly and at first on consuming that information. So as opposed to necessarily going and creating your own threat intelligence and hunting and things like that. Those tend to be missions that we see teams grow into as they become more secure in how they're driving operations and as they become better resourced. So a lot of what we've talked about here in terms of curating a stream of information that's going to be actionable for you is really, I think, where the rubber meets the road for teams that are just starting out, even if they're very small.
Awesome. Looks like there aren't any more that have come in, and that's all the time we have anyway today. If there are any more questions that anyone has, feel free to contact us over email. There's Tony's email on the screen and also info@emtdist.com. Both of those will be answered. We'll get the recordings out to you as quickly as we possibly can. And thank you again for attending, and we'll hope to see you at the next ThreatConnect and EMT webinar.